Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exoterra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exoterra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exoterra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exoterra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Zac here with the one and only Clint Bartley. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, buddy. I'm a little tired, but I don't think I'm quite as tired as you are. But
I'm tired.
Finally, you're the one with the hectic weekend, and
yes,
yeah. So,
after 6 years, we kind of opened the Appalachian Aquatic Conservation Center on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I cut that ribbon with the giant scissors I could have used to kill someone, but worked pretty much straight through Sunday through Thursday, nonstop. It was absolutely wonderful. It's been a while since I've been truly in the trenches with the students at school. I'm in the trenches with the kids when I go on a field trip, right alongside them. But at school, I've got to put that administrator cap on, which it's a love-hate relationship at best. But I basically told everybody at the school, I am going over to the center. I have to move tons of gravel with buckets. Literally did that. Get all the enclosures ready, get all the systems ready, get everything ready for our opening on Thursday. And I have to say, it was absolutely wonderful kind of go into my old world of being right there alongside the kids at school. So it was fine. And then we had the opening, and then I had to drive up to the Pittsburgh airport on Friday night to catch a 6 a.m. flight to Missouri to see two of my graduate students get married on Saturday, awesome. Which was awesome. Congratulations, Eric and Catherine. They are incredibly special people to me. They did crayfish research for their theses. And then, you do things at weddings that make it so that on Sunday, it's kind of hard to get up. And then met a current graduate student and a future graduate student at Mingo Swamp in Missouri in the middle of an inland hurricane. I don't know what the hell happened to Missouri, and that might have hit you. I don't know if it did. All that rain that was
lots
there.
Lots of rain.
Holy hell. And I come from West Virginia. We're in the middle of a drought. So it's been a while since I was in rain, but we were actually looking for fish, bantam sunfish for the fish heads in the audience. And then went from Mingo Swamp at around 2, drove up to St. Louis, crashed in the hotel, woke up, and then got a herp tour of the St. Louis Herp Department yesterday. And mother of God, listen, this guy has been in now a dozen plus herp departments across the country. I've always heard about St. Louis. St. Louis is held on a standard. And I had an expectation, and St. Louis and what Justin Eldon, the curator there, and Jeff, the zoo manager, ZM, have done with leadership there is just phenomenal. That herp department blew me out of the water. It normally takes an hour and 10 minutes to do a behind-the-scenes tour well. And that tour took 3 hours and 45 minutes, and we were kind of rushing at the end to get it done. So incredible facility. I know we're a Colubrid show, but if you like vipers, for the love of God, get your ass to St. Louis Zoo and see what they have on exhibit. I saw genera of Eurasian vipers that I've read about my whole life and haven't actually seen alive or in a jar. So that was cool. And then went from St. Louis to the airport in Chicago. And of course, we all know what's going on with the government. So there weren't enough people up in a little tower to get the planes to land at O'Hare. So I was supposed to fly out at 8, and then it went to 8:30, and then it went to 9, and then it went to 9:30, and then it went to 11, and then it went to 12:30. And so I got into my house this morning at 3:30, and then I took a little nap, woke up, and went to the Columbus Zoo for spotted turtle conservation meeting where I had to be on point. If y'all know Tanya, some of you know Tanya. Tanya and I went to the zoo, and then we got back about 2.5 hours ago, and now I'm here. So no rest for the wicked, and I am super pumped about tonight's episode because we've talked about Dr. Ossiboff, known as Dr. Oz, the awesome Dr. Oz, and how his talk scared the living crap out of both of us when we were at IHS. Yeah, like it was literally almost I'm done being a herpetoculturist because I can't win.
I think I remember saying, okay, now everyone go wash your hands.
Yeah, wash your hands.
Just go wash your hands.
Start over. So we're going to inspire you with the episode tonight. And we knew immediately when we saw Dr. Oz give the presentation, like he is coming on the show. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is emerging pathogens and then some, pathogens that have been around in colubrids and colubroids for a while now. And then, but we don't necessarily know everything about them as from the hobby perspective. So it's always great to have people, that study these things clinically on to discuss them. So this is our second vet to bring on. Of course, we have the other Dr. Zac, Dr. Whitman, who serves as our kind of resident vet. But tonight we have Dr. Oz on to talk about, what he does. And he's a professor and a veterinarian at University of Florida who's actually studying these pathogens. So if you're in the chat, start messaging your friends and get their asses over here, because if they've got a collection with a lot of animals, or even a few animals, this is a no-miss episode. This one's an important one. So, but that's me. What's up with you?
So I tell you, I've been pretty happy with the way some things have played out. It's, since coming home from Tinley, I feel like I've really put on my productive pants. You know what I mean? And it's, we're able to get some things knocked out that have been sitting on the back burner for a long time. As far as here in the shop, we've got our very last clutch of the year pipping right now. It's a clutch of ball pythons. So it's, finally going to get to put that, no more new snakes. Right. Yeah. No more new that are hatching out of our incubator, anyway. Mm-hmm. I've already started making plans on what's pairing for next season, because that way I can start moving out any animals that, are no longer going to fit in the collection. And, hopefully somebody else is going to need this piece for their puzzle, stuff like that. And it helps make room for holdbacks. But a few things that I did that I'm kind of proud of. One, nice. I have, I've talked about this board that's across from me several times, my idea board. And one of the things that I've had on here for a while, and I've actually had spoke to you about it previously, was designing internship programs. Mm-hmm. Because I had been asked about them, and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I need to sit down and actually map out what it really needs to look like, and what we're going to want to do. And I had a young man named Dylan, who is a senior at one of the local high schools, come in. He's one of our regulars as well. He came in, had talked to me about wanting to do an internship. He's going to be going to become a veterinarian. When he graduates in May, he'll head off to college. And I was like, come talk to me next week. I need, that was the fire I needed, lit to, under me to make it happen. And so that's what I did. Sat down, cranked out, an internship program for our nursery. 2 of them for our collection, 1 for the rodent breeding operation, and then another one for social media and marketing. Nice. And, kind of mapped all that out, and we've had our first intern start yesterday, started on Monday. And that's so far so good. And I mean, and it's exciting because, it's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to be able to give this individual some hands-on experience that they're not going to get anywhere else. Now, given he's going to be washing a lot of tubs, and he will tell you that that's what a lot of his first couple days have been. But we're teaching him how to sanitize the tubs. If these aren't if they're too big to go in the dishwasher, here's the process to ensure that they're going to be completely sanitized for use. Here's why in these baby tubs we're using paper towels so that we're constantly changing these frequently. Okay, now here are holdbacks with bedding. Here's how we spot clean. Here's how we sanitize with that. We did some sexing exercise with popping baby ball pythons already, and just going to continue to give him a lot of these pieces. But at the same time, what I relayed to Corey, because Corey is overseeing this internship in the nursery, and it's actually in preparation for some changes we're looking at in January. That I'll go down that path when we get there. But she, she's getting another set of hands, right? But like what I've relayed to her and what she's understanding and actually designing more policies and procedures back there is, it's not about lightening the load for the nursery specialist. It's about us being able to enhance our procedures by having the additional individual. So it's, if we're cleaning every tub, if every tub is getting looked at twice a week now, it should be able to be looked at 3 to 4 times a week now in the nursery. Things like that, to be able to up this water is been soiled in. Just things like that to continue to ensure that the health stays where it needs to be, as well as it increases your productivity at the same time, from a business standpoint. So, and we're looking at doing the same thing in others. So that was really cool. I've got the show schedule made now for 2026. So I don't know how we're going to do it all, but I know where we're going to go.
I was listening to your Reptile Rejects episode on the plane.
Yeah. And
I heard you just kind of slide in there. We're doing 40 shows.
That's right now. It looks like it's going to be about 40 shows next year. And
well done, son.
The good thing is now we've got it spread to where there are 4 of us that can lead a show. So it's, I can do a show, but there are 3 other people who can go do shows, whether they have assistants or not. So that's going to certainly, help it out. And it's opening me to be able to go do some shows that are a little further away than what we would normally go to. But the whole thing was, I wanted Metazotics to do more shows. I personally can't. I don't want to give up more weekends than I, already am, because I've got kids. I want to go to the ball games. I want to do all that fun stuff. So, got that going. The Arid Room is so close to being done. I'm hoping probably by the end of this week, maybe having that completed. And also just today, was talking to Mike Clarkson, who we're going to have on in just a little bit, and we're able to finally get some things that out there. What I'm responsible for with IHS, being able to put these ideas together and get some things on paper that now I can run with that. So a lot of that's been good. One other side thing that has nothing to do with reptiles is really cool. So I'm the class of 2000. I graduated in 2000. Which means my 20-year reunion was in 2020.
Yeah.
So we had no 20-year reunion because you couldn't get within 6 feet of anybody. So we had a 25-year class reunion this past weekend, and that was awesome. I had such a good time. I mean, seeing people that have moved away and came back just for this. And so now I didn't get where I was feeling so bad on Sunday, Zach.
I did.
Like you in the wedding, but I certainly had a good time.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much what we've got going on out here.
All righty. Well, we're going to do the science update first, because we have a special guest for the science update. But before we bring our guest on, science update brought to you by Rare Genetics Inc. As always, get your shed skins for your morphs, for your various bull snakes, pine snakes, corn snakes, milk snakes, king snakes, hognose snakes, anything colubrid, colubroid. Slap that quarter-sized piece of dried skin into a sandwich bag, press it, label the bag, and then ship it to Ben and Kayla at RGI. And they're going to help us, of course, figure out these morphs that we're all very interested in actually understanding the genetic mechanisms of. So they're our sponsor. And for that, today's a little different. So bringing to the stage right now, the one, the only Mike Clarkson, former guest on the show, and International Herpetological Symposium president. And he put a call out into social media land, into the ether, and said, "Hey, I need a podcast." And I'm just wondering if when you did that, you were like, "CCR, wait a second."
Yeah, were you testing us? Were you like, let's see if they even pay attention to what I put out here.
To be honest, I was like, it's probably going to end up on CCR, like 90% chance, but equal opportunity, promoter.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's conflict of interest being that CCR is, a good portion of the board.
Yeah, a little.
But honestly, for our audience, I think this is the perfect venue. So I'm happy to be on here. We got some big secrets that we've been keeping that why not just peel that off? So,
yeah. So,
as you guys,
we get to the secrets. Could you just tell people, because our audience has grown since the last time we had you on, what IHS is, what the big deal is about the meeting this year, and where it's going to be?
For sure. So IHS started in 1976. And for those of you that are not super familiar with herpetoculture as a practice, that's right around the time to start amping up. Like you had a little bit of things going on in the 60s, but by the mid 70s, all of a sudden American colubrids, they started to learn cooling and egg incubation. And the earliest discussions, this is before forums. You either had a paper letter or you had to turn the rotary phone. So the way to discuss and share this information was symposiums. And 1976, IHS was born. The first talks on incubation, the first talks on leopard gecko breeding and king snake breeding were all those early meetings. It was the birthplace of herpetoculture as a sharing discussion. And as the organization has grown, we are a big venue for zookeepers to present, for major academic people to present. But it's an interesting organization because it's a mixed bag. It's not just keepers. Your guest today, who's also a friend of mine, Oz, presented IHS, as you mentioned, and just really a mix of cutting edge herpetoculture. You can learn what the zoos are doing, and then major academics where, people you maybe only know their name from a book spine. You can get to see them meet and be colleagues with them, which is not something we normally have an opportunity to do on an internet interface. And a little basic math, 1976 to next year. Oh, look, it's our 50th anniversary. So we got together and said we should do something special for that. And we decided the best venue would be the world's biggest herpetological library / probably, I would imagine, the world's biggest herpetology history museum, which is Bob Ashley's Chiricahua Desert Museum and the Library of Herpetoculture or Herpetology. And, if you haven't been there, not only is the library massive, but he's got things like, famous herpers, snake hooks, and all sorts of just like really nerdy stuff that like we all love. And I'm sure the general visitors are like, why is there a stick in a box? Not only that, but we've moved the dates this year. So traditionally IHS is June 19th. It's easy for me to remember because it's my wedding anniversary, so I always miss it. Not IHS, my anniversary. Of course, I got to have my priorities. Good thing Becca doesn't watch this. So this year we're moving it till July 29th to August 1st. And you might be like, hey, why are you pushing it back on us? Because that's better monsoon season. And the Chiricahua Desert Museum happens to sit in some of North America's best herping, or at least the United States' best herping. I mean, we're talking Gila monsters. We're talking rock rattlesnakes easy. For the colubrids, desert kings and green rats. And it's really just like, it's the place you want to herp if you've never herped. And that's the time of year you want to herp.
Yep.
But on top of all that, we got a bunch of special stuff planned because we're not just celebrating 50 years of IHS. In a sense, this is the bicentennial of herpetoculture, right? We've almost been doing this for 50 years. Why not mark that and have the people that really founded it tell their stories? Because I think early in the 90s, a lot of the people that were the initial pioneers were still at shows, so we all know those names, and a lot of us would be like, ooh, Hamper, oh my gosh, those were names. But since I think we've forgotten some of our history, we forgot how we got here. So this meeting will be a nice opportunity of where we're going, but where we came from. And we're going to be getting a lot of really big names in. In terms of keepers, we're going to have that old school crowd. We also have Warren Booth, which if you ever heard him speak,
yep,
incredible. Leslie Boyer, another huge name. Rob Hansen. Let's see, Dave Hughes, Tel Hicks. Brett Baldwin from the San Diego Zoo, Quetzal Dwyer, so Roland Griffin. So we got a great lineup. But there's two big things we haven't said anything about. And one of them, I think the herp nerds like myself will be super stoked for this talk. And I'm only highlighting it because it's so different. Margie Crisp is speaking about Grace Wiley. Her granddaughter is speaking about like the legacy of Grace Wiley, who's like a huge fixture in the history of herpetology. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think most people really know much of that story. So we'll be hearing that, which is just awesome.
Well, but tell a little bit about who Grace Wiley is, because she's super cool.
Oh yeah, I mean Grace Wiley. If you go back. The early days of keeping, she was really a keeper that got attention because now this is a different time, but she was also a free handler. So a rattlesnake advocate and a Gila monster advocate. And a lot of zoos and academics were going to her because she was getting behavior observations with her interactions with her animals. And this was a time when herpetology was purely a male-dominated field. So, I mean, she's kind of, I've got a picture of her in my herp room, holding a Gila monster. But in a lot of ways, she was one of the first strong female figures at all in herpetology. So to hear about her legacy is really cool on our 50th. Yeah. But that is really just like a candy sample of the big one, which is we're going to have the Founders of Herpetoculture panel. So it's going to be a panel discussion with all of these early breeders. And we think about it like 50 years, this will never happen again. For a lot of these folks, this is going to be a long journey to get out there and share their story. But we have Frank Reedus, Bob Applegate, Dave Barker. I've been reading off a list so I don't forget anyone. Gary Sipperly, Kathy Love, Craig Trumbauer, Chris Rocher, Bill Brandt, Robbie Hamper, Wayne Hill, and Lonnie McCaskill. All of those names on the same panel discussing where we came from, where we're going, what they've seen over the last 50 years as a forum panel discussion. And to me, I don't think in terms of heavy-hitting herpetoculture names, anything like this has ever been done.
No.
Yeah, that's
it's going to be something in these Dragon Trader herpetoculture history books they're going to have to mention. Now, the only caveat, registration is open, but because we're getting such a huge lineup, and it's kind of a historic 50th anniversary of IHS and herpetoculture, we could sell out. So that's the only warning I'll give people. We've got a maximum building capacity of 250 people. So if you do want to go there, definitely go to iHerpSimp sooner than later. And the other thing is, there isn't actually 250 people's worth of accommodations in the town that the Chiricahua Desert Museum's in. So if you book your accommodations too late, you're going to have a 40-minute drive to get there because there are hotels further, but you won't be right there where everyone else will. So if that sounds like something you can't miss, if you want to be a part of a moment in herpetoculture history, get on it sooner than later because I'm going to feel terrible when we sell out, but that's just the parameters we have.
Yeah, no, I am stoked. I'm going to be paying for an extra suitcase to lug all these damn books out there to get those people to sign.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I actually, now that you say that, I hadn't thought of that, but I'm looking at it going, oh, yeah. Yeah. So another just example of like, not a huge announcement, but it would normally be, is Dave Barker talking on blood pythons, the history, the natural history, and the breeding. The man that like launched blood pythons. Yeah. So we're not having just like, hey, I have some blood pythons. These are the founders that got the stock that we work with today and telling their story. And to me, I am damn lucky to be the one that gets to spearhead it because that was just happenstance and really excited to really
about that
share that history. Yeah, I think it's cool.
In this vivarium right here, there's an albino blood python right now. He just entered, he got out of quarantine. And when I pulled him out of the bag, and this sorry youngins listening, but there was a Reptiles magazine where they did the first article on blood pythons. And there was an albino blood in that kind of semi-coil on the cover. It's such an iconic 90s, edition of Reptiles. And I distinctly remember getting yelled at in my American Lit class because I was reading that damn article on blood pythons and not paying attention to like Of Mice and Men or something. And I kind of pushed back because I was like, well, I'm reading something So anyway, but
that article is why I got my first
when
blood.
I looked at that snake in the bag, I was like, I'm right back to being like in 10th grade, because I distinctly remember thinking I will never own that. And it was one of those kind of watershed moments we all have when we inevitably accomplish something or get something added to the collection. And yeah, so no, blood pythons, they're my favorite pythons. So I know it's cool.
I have a Borneo short-tailed python tooth stuck in this finger from going to see them in the wild.
Nice.
It's been in there since 2017. But that magazine I kept, and it was probably like 6 years later before I got my first just regular blood python. But it was that Reptiles magazine where I was like, I'm gonna get one of those. And then with the field herping, I was like, now I need to go see one. I haven't seen the true Malaysian bloods, but yeah, no, blood pythons. We don't need it. This is a Colubrid show, but yeah, no. I mean, in terms of size, just beauty, those are really. And if anyone's going to speak on them, especially at this meeting, I want to hear what Dave Barker has to say about the history.
Absolutely.
So
very excellent.
So fun stuff. And we should, by the way, I'm hoping to have the full schedule on our website, iherpsimp.org, probably in the next 2 weeks. So there's just a few people we're waiting to lock in. So when I do get that, I'll send it to you guys first, and you can share like any other lineups that are worth mentioning. But like I said, it's going to be a pretty packed one.
All right, sweet.
Looking forward to it.
Well, anything else, sir?
That's all for now.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the show, making that announcement here. We're happy that we were the place. Bob
of course,
guys. I don't need to say anything else. Literally Applegate enclosure, like we talked about that.
You're going to have here. Applegate and Trumbauer up there at the same
and
time.
Craig, holy hell.
Yes.
Yeah. One of these days we'll have to talk about house sitting for Applegate. That was fun.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right, sir. Thank you for coming on. All righty.
We appreciate
you guys.
Mike. You
have a great show and enjoy talking to Oz.
Yep. All right. Later. Okay, Clint.
All right, so let's jump over to let's jump over to the market update. And as always, the market update is brought to you by the Show Me Reptile Show. As we always say, Mickey and his team, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have Colubrid Fest. So please, if there's a Show Me Reptile Show near you, go out, check them out, support those that support us, and by us, I mean those of us in the Colubrid community. We greatly appreciate them. So for the market update, being that we're not going over numbers tonight, there's just two things that I kind of wanted to mention. The first is I want to talk about shows for just a little bit, because I have been noticing the shows that I've been attending recently. As I mentioned, Tinley a few weeks ago, attendance is a little softer than normal. And I was just speaking to a rep. Let's call it a rep. I don't like to mention the companies, but a rep was in the shop today, and we were chatting, and they were just at the Nashville Plant and Exotics Expo, which I've heard nothing but great things about. In fact, that's one of the shows we've added to our potential roster for next year. Hopefully I can get in. And I had asked about, how it went. They go, well, I'll be honest, it was slow. It was slower than normal. And there were other things that were a factor. And I want to make sure that I'm saying I don't know who the show promoter is for that particular show. In no way am I putting down that Nashville show at all, because again, I have heard nothing but great things about it, and it's a show that I'm going to be checking out as well. Show Me has a show out there as well in Nashville that does very well, so that's a great area for shows. But we're in that time of year where it does get soft, kind of from about the end of October. Really, when it comes to shows, it can be through December and into January before attendance really pops back up. Being that we, of course, have the retail shop, we see the Black Friday buzz. There's always the Black Friday and Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday online piece, and then the Christmas, retail pop. But I'm saying all this because I'm not going to deter anyone from vending shows or going to shows. What I'm going to tell you as a vendor is concentrate more on making yourself approachable, making your animals stand out, because it's the people who are coming into the shows are still there looking to get something. There's just not going to be as many through the door as normal. And don't be surprised when that happens. And so I'm seeing it across all promotions. So this is kind of in defense of a lot of the promoters. It's not that they're doing anything differently or poorly. It's simply, this is the time of year, recognize the cycles, know to expect it, know to roll with that. The second thing that I want to talk about was off of a Facebook post that I had already saw the post, and then I was tagged in it by our good friend Rob Zirkle, because he found it interesting, because it obviously it was all about the market, right? And what this post was, it was referring to bearded dragons, but we can kind of cross this with everything. This individual was taking their ads off of Morph Market at the time, because they felt that the online presence right now was not conducive to what the animals should be selling for. Like, the market wasn't there, they were undervalued. And so they didn't want to post them and didn't want to sell them. Completely understand it. And I guess the pieces that I want everyone to think about, because I think that all of us have kind of had some frustrations at that at times, that there is some truth to it, but there's also some cycles to it. Just as I mentioned that we're looking at lower attendance at shows at the moment, you're going to have fewer people buying online right now. I mean, we got holidays coming up. People just had to spend money on their kids' costumes for Halloween. Then you've got Thanksgiving, and then you're spending money on Christmas. There's a lot of things that are going to pull money out of the pocket and hurt that discretionary fund. So know that. The other thing that it is affecting the market, and now it's getting a lot more blame than what it should, are auctions. Yes, auctions do affect the market. Now, they don't affect it to the degree that people think, where they feel it's crashing. Everything's just, so cheap because of auctions. No, the things that are going to be affected because of auctions are going to first place. Because yes, you see more ball pythons up for auction than anything else, because there's more ball pythons listed for sale than anything else. You see a lot of crested geckos up for auction. You see there's certain colubrid species you see more up for auction than, and I'm going to tell you what, I was blown away on something I noticed, because I was like, you know what? Hey, I've got some extra stuff here. I'm going to throw 3 auctions up. Here are the 3 things I put up. I put a Mexican black king snake. I put a sandblast. I think it was a sandblast sterling pied ball python. So you're talking 1, 2, 3, 4 genes. One of those genes has 2 copies, all present. So we could say a 5 gene ball python. And if I'm mathing right, and I think maybe like a hypo motley boa. So I had a spread, a little bit of a spread, just to put out there and see what happened. The ball python was listed for, I think, 400 is what I had on that. Maybe 5, probably 4. It went for $70. The Mexican black king snake went for 80 on this auction. Yeah. And I mean, I have no problem with Mexican black king snakes typically selling at 175. It's just, I wanted to see what auction would happen. And that's what happened. Now, did I pick the best time of year to throw things on auction? No. But I did find it very interesting that the Mexican black king snake went for more than what the, 4 gene visual pied, went for ball pythons. But The other piece, when we talk about auctions, because it's not just Morph Market that gets hammered on it, it's everyone has discussed Palm Street. And I've done a little bit of looking through on Palm Street, but I think that that's probably geared more towards people younger than us.
Wait, can you
Because
tell the world what Palm Street? I don't know what this is.
so Palm Street is it's basically it's like an app, it's a site where it's all auctions, but it still kind of confuses me because again, I'm old. It instead of it being an auction where like you're just there's 3 days to bid, it's live. So like, you know, it'd be if I
They're
went
waiting for them.
like if I went on live and I'm saying, okay, I'm auctioning off this, you know, ice drink and it's, you know, yada yada. And you can like build it up and everything to get people to come there when you're on. And I might be oversimplifying or not giving it enough justice. I don't know. For me, it's very busy. Which is making it harder. It's for those of you that are on Discord. Discord is kind of too busy for me too. You know, there's a lot of stuff, and so I struggle to learn it all and know what I'm looking at. And that's what I kind of feel like with Palm Street. And I mean, it is affecting it. It absolutely is affecting it. But I think that it's not affecting things to the degree that it's getting blamed. The shifts that we're feeling in the market, they're bigger than the reptile industry right now. There's other markets that are still going through their cycles.
The world we live in is not the same world we lived in.
100%. We don't live in the same world right now that we lived in a year ago.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that everyone has to accept is like it or not, things are different. Like it or not, people are nervous. Like it or not, there are a lot of people who are making a little less or having to spend more on necessities, you know, and so that's what's causing us to feel the shifts. So we can put the blame anywhere we want to, but it's all of this together is what's causing some of these pieces. Now, instead of just pointing out what's causing it, to give you guys some ideas on things to shift, rather than pulling animals off the market because you don't sell things that aren't out there to be sold. You want to keep your animals, you know, out visible, but update your pictures, give more specific information on that specific animal. Put it in more areas. Don't rely just on Morph Market. You know, let's get it into Show Me Marketplace. There's a lot of eyes on that. Get yourself out to the shows. Get yourself active in, excuse me, social media. I saw our friend Kayla in the comments a moment ago. I mean, and I've seen she's all over right now. Infrared Reptiles is all over the place posting, you know, things that she's, you know, got out there available. And I see that she's moving a lot of animals at the same time, but she's making it happen, you know, and that's the thing that we have to do. Don't get discouraged. If people are offering you a, you know, lower amount than what you think you should take, say no. Don't be offended. Say no. Move on. I say no every day to certain offers, but I accept some too. You never know. So don't get mad. Don't get discouraged. Stay on point. Make it happen. And that is the market update for the day.
Can I say something real quick? Because we've got just a couple minutes.
Sure.
So this was the first year. So we all know, if you listen to the show, you know, I am the nerd. I breed the snakes. I'm not in this to make tons of money. I literally, to figure out how much money I need to support this at the house, I literally treated it like a grant proposal budget because I love my Excel spreadsheets. So every single snake, I figured out what it needs to eat a month. So I got a master spreadsheet that just, so I have a tally of who lives here. And then one column is like number of feedings per month. And then the other column is price per prey. That's how I've got it. And then I multiply that by 10% to give me a cushion in case something goes wrong. And then that goes out in my spreadsheet. And then every snake's got that calculated per month. And then I multiply it by, I do, what do I do? I think I do 8 months because for 4 months they're broodmating. And then the snakes that aren't broodmating, I think I can make up for it. But the ones that are making with that 10% increase blah de blah. And then total, and then that's like the dollar amount I need for the food bill. Now, granted, we all know what happened to rodent prices this past year, so my calculations were a little bit off, so I increased that buffer. But anyway, I had that dollar amount that I needed to make. And last year I didn't come close because I hate selling snakes. I hate it. I despise it. Eric Burke on MPR hates selling snakes. I hate selling snakes. But this was the year I learned the magic of wholesaling. Holy hell. So as someone who's not trying to make like an extra $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, which if I would have sold every single snake I produced at the so-called morph market price, I would have made well beyond $40,000. But you introduced me to Jordan, and then Alder has reached out to me now, and then we did the whole CCR false water cobra rate, and so I had a lot of people reaching in, and from there. But I have actually had no problem moving snakes this year. And if you go on to like Morph Market and you look at the oddball snakes, false water cobras are so common in that now that there's a legitimate, like a subcategory of false water cobras. And since July, I've moved out of, my collection here. I think I'm up to 50 babies, which, I was kind of like, God damn. So I got the freezer filled. I've got it. It's starting to fill for next year. Which is good. So if you're sitting on snakes, I know you talk about this, and you if this is your way of paying your electric bill, don't do what I'm saying. But if you are kind of freaking out a little bit, you might want to consider the wholesaling, because at least the people that are buying up wholesale, they don't seem to be going away. Like they seem to be right there.
And it's another thing. I guess this was advice that I got years and years ago when it came to just business as a whole. And while I understand that everyone listening to this right now is doing this for business, if you're a breeder, there's a business aspect to it. Yeah. And so just this always reigns true. Do not allow yourself to get too hot or too cold.
Yeah. And
what that means is when you're experiencing a phenomenal trend, so whether, you're having a year that's the end of 2020 and 2021,
yep.
That's where a lot of people made mistakes because they had this killer year when it came to selling animals and making a lot of money. And then they planned their future based off of that trend. And that is not going to, to live up to it. So it's don't allow yourself to get too hot, but at the same time, when things aren't moving as quick, when things feel like, it's not selling or it's not selling for the right price, don't allow yourself to get cold either. Don't think, I'm, throw it all away, give it all up. It's not going to do. No, you can assess things, specifically like the way that you were breaking down your cost, on it. Now, if you weighed that cost versus, okay, here's what babies are now moving for, I'm at best breaking even on my adults, then it's probably not worth the time, but if it's, they're still selling, they're selling at 80% of what they were selling at last year. I just have to sit on them for about an extra 4 to 5 weeks than, what I used to. All that plays a factor. So that's what I'm telling everyone. And please, if things aren't moving for you, I am not saying that you're not working for it. I'm not saying that you're not doing anything to make that happen. Not at all. What I'm saying is step back and look at what you're doing, because it's not always how much energy you're putting into it. It's where are you putting your energy?
Yeah.
That's what it is. So it's just making sure that you are giving the attention and, your direction is the right direction on how you're putting your animals out there, how you're getting the word out there, how you're presenting them, and what have you. So if they're not moving, find another way. No. That's it. Don't give up. Find another way.
I've moved plenty of things at full price. I don't want everybody to be thinking I just like wholesale it, but I did like a little cost benefit, and I'm like, these false water cobras are eating a lot, and and they're making a lot of crap, which is sucking up all my time. And last year I would have just gutted it out. But this year, thanks to you and a couple other people, I was like, I'm going to find something. We're going to come up with a solution. And I will admit, it's kind of nice. And there's a little pocket of snake money there for something if I want, to add anything, but I'm not adding anything. So, okay. Are we ready?
I think we're good.
All right. So, Clint, who sponsors our guest?
You got it. Our guest portion is always sponsored by ReptiChip. ReptiChip is a substrate that both Zac and I use. I like to use the Repti Earth a lot for our nest boxes, things like that. Zac, I know that you use the ReptiChip for incubation, and I also use it for a lot of the Asian colubrids, ball pythons, boas. I mean, we use literally tons of it at this point. So good stuff. Get you some ReptiChip. Fantastic product. Welcome, Oz.
Yes.
Good evening, gentlemen.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you both?
We're doing great.
Fantastic, buddy.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, that's part of my day.
We're excited to have you. We discussed when mapping out our episodes for the rest of this year, we knew we wanted to have something special for what we're calling our Halloween episode, so kind of the week of Halloween. And we're like, well, it's got to be scary. What's scary? And we thought, well, do we want to talk about something with venom? And we're like, it's not scary, but it's like, what actually scares colubrid keepers? Disease scares colubrid keepers. Communicable disease scares. So it's like, that's what we need. And instantly Zac's like, oh, I know who I'm going to call because you scared the hell out of us already once at IHS. So, we're really looking forward to this one.
Yes. But knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. And tonight, everybody's going to get a little bit educated. So I was actually at the Columbus Zoo today, like I said earlier, and I was walking around with one of their lead keepers in the herpetology department. And she was, of course, crypto came up because they were dealing with crypto in a very small incidence of it a while back. And she basically was like, it's so refreshing that at the beginning part of my career, with crypto, it was like, kill it now, like it must die. And now she said, if we have a way to move forward, we're not necessarily killing it. We watch it, we see how it's going, and she mentioned that, like, it's because of the work that's being done in places like U of F, with Dr. Bogan at OCIC, places like that. So anyway. Yeah. But before we get to diseases, I want to know how you ended up with your position. And then would you mind introducing to the guests, or you're the guest, to the listeners, what your position is at University of Florida? Because it's a really cool gig. And by the way, oh my God, I just did that thing you do when you're over 40 where you think of something and it goes away. Your recent PhD student that does serpentivirus. Everybody knows him. Steve Tillis. So if you know Dr. Tillis, if you're a Python person, you were his advisor, correct?
Correct. Yep.
There you go.
Steve's a great guy, and he's working in the ZooMed diagnostic lab at UF, and he's doing good stuff. And so, my position at UF, I wear multiple hats, and that's kind of the way I like it. It keeps my ADHD occupied. So I am a veterinary pathologist. So a lot of what I do is reading cases, necropsies, biopsies. And then from that material, I generate my research material. I use the cases that I get to kind of investigate reptile diseases, amphibian diseases, identify new diseases, better understand the diseases that we have. And then I also do a fair bit of teaching, kind of both for UF students, but then for undergrads and vet students kind of across the US. I gave a lecture to MSU earlier today for some undergrads there. This past summer, we started and this is probably not a surprise to many of you, vet school doesn't do a great job of addressing reptile and amphibian health. And so there's not a lot. Most of the schools don't have people who are teaching the curricula. So this past summer, we started a week-long virtual course called Herp Vet, which is for vet students and early career veterinarians, which is 5 long days of back-to-back lectures kind of talking about reptiles, everything from, you know, anatomy and husbandry to advanced disease stuff, trying to, you know, really give vet students a better outlook on medicine and reptiles and amphibians. So yeah, I mean, I love what I do. My background is a little, so I went to vet school. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. I loved reptiles and amphibians, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be my career direction. And then I did a PhD studying viruses in animals. And then that's when I decided I really wanted to kind of dedicate my time to help better understand diseases in reptiles and amphibians. And from that, that's how I did the pathology thing. Because it's, you know, when you think about veterinarians, working on dead animals isn't exactly the most exciting, but the reptile and amphibian medicine side of things, we're decades behind other species of animal. And really one of the best ways of really understanding that is to look at them and understand why they're dying. And that allows me to really get a good idea of, you know, diseases that are new, diseases that are becoming more of an issue. And I do that both on the captive side and the free ranging reptile side.
Oh, very cool.
Nice.
Very, very cool. So is your degree is a PhD, not a DVM, or you have a DVM too, or?
Yeah, I have both, unfortunately.
You're a double doctor.
Yeah.
He's got all those letters.
He's the superior doctor today.
Yeah.
Still the third smartest person on this episode right here.
We love you, Clint. Okay. Sweet. So we're reptile. First of all, if you wouldn't mind just letting us know, like, where'd you grow up? And then were reptiles like kind of always a thing, or is this something like for me, I didn't know I was going to study crayfish. It wasn't until I got to graduate school and I started thinking like scientifically and questions, and then like, ooh, giant knowledge void. I can be the guy that does that, you know, and that's what kind of led me into crawdads. You know, I'm curious, was that kind of viruses first, then reptiles, or was reptiles, viruses? I can put these things together kind of thing.
So reptiles were always there, but I had the crazy dream earlier in my life that I was actually going to make money, and there's not not exactly a ton of money when you start getting into to academics, research, reptile. But so I grew up in southern New Jersey, just right on the Delaware Bay, and you know, had a ton of pets growing up as a kid. You know, I was breeding hamsters. I had an iguana. I had some plated lizards. You know, I had different things, and I just really loved. I mean, I loved, you know, going out and catching tadpoles and seeing all the native reptiles. So they were always really a thing of interest for me. But I didn't think I was going to do anything with them professionally. And then when I was in vet school, I had a little bit more geographic stability. I wasn't moving as frequently. So I got a tank of dart frogs, and that's really what kind of set it off. And then, you know, I grew a substantial dart frog collection, and that was a lot of fun. And I had those. And then, you know, my first kind of big reptile collection was montane chameleons, because I was in upstate New York.
Nice.
And, you know, I had a basement that was cool in the summer and cooler in the winter, but not horribly cool. And it was perfect for all the montane chameleons. For those of you that might know Chris Anderson, he's a professor at South Dakota. He does chameleon work. He and I were both, I mean, just a couple of miles away from each other. And we just had a crazy chameleons, and it was cool stuff. And then I got my first snake, was a rough-scaled sand boa, and it was a cool snake for something that lived underneath the substrate, and you didn't get to see very much. And then, you know, I had some rosy boas, and I love natural phenotypic variation. I think that's why I like the dart frog so much. You know, Ufaga Pamilio, every island has its own color, and it's not, nature did all the work. You don't have to select a breed because nature did it for you. And I think that's why I really love the rosy boas. And then I worked at the Bronx Zoo for a couple of years. So I was in New York City, and that limited my pet options. And then I was in Chicago working with the zoos and aquaria in Chicago. And then when I came down to Florida, again, I had a little more long-term stability, and I was actually doing an educational session with Steve Tillis, with elementary school students, and I loved talking about the snakes, but we were using Steve's snakes because I didn't have any of my own. And so Elliot Jacobson, who some of you might know, kind of a classic reptile veterinarian, he was a UF emeritus, and he's right here in Gainesville, and he was a friend of mine. And I said, hey, I want a nice, big but chill snake that I can use for outreach. And he got me hooked on Drymarchon. And that was, holding a colubrid, and again, nothing against other snakes, but handling an intelligent colubrid like a Drymarchon versus a rosy boa or a rough scaled sandboa, it was night and day. And that kind of was the bug that got me on the snake. So now I've got my snake room behind me. I've got 24 snakes. You talked all about the market and the challenges, and Zac, I know time is of the most limited thing. Every one of the snakes behind me is a boy, so that I don't even try and get the urge to do any breeding. It is a sausage party in here for a reason. But yeah, so I decided I really wanted to do reptiles when I was doing because I did a combined DVM PhD, so 2 years vet school, 3 years PhD vet school, then finished PhD. And it was during then that I realized money isn't what's going to keep me happy and important. It's really trying to improve our understanding of something. And I just loved reptiles and amphibians so much that was it. You talked about reading the Reptiles magazine in 10th grade. I was in vet school labs searching through kingsnake.com, and the guys, they would walk by and be like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm studying for the lab. And that's kind of how it started. And unfortunately, there's not enough people doing advanced reptile disease work. There's a lot that needs to be done. And I thought that by being at a zoo, being at the Bronx or the zoos in Chicago, that I would be able to do that. And it did allow me to see some cool cases. But at the zoos, it's the charismatic megafauna that are really, big players. And the only way I was going to make a difference was if I specialized as much as possible in amphibians and reptiles. And so that's what brought me to UF. And my caseload is unbelievable. I mean, I read a skin biopsy from a green mamba this morning and the liver biopsy from an axolotl. And we did rhino iguana necropsies last week, cora necropsies. Every day it's something exciting. And so it's really cool to just love what I do and try and make a difference.
Well, I can tell that you love what you do. And this doesn't have anything to do with snakes, but we have spotted turtles at the school. And before I knew who you were, we were just doing the whole professional correspondence. We had a couple spotted turtles pass, and we didn't know what was going on. And so we reached out to Cleveland Zoo, and they said, send them to U of F, and they ended up in your hands. And I'll never forget the email that you sent. And I knew you loved what you did, because it was like, so this isn't, paraphrasing, this isn't the best, but there's some kind of parasitic cnidarian in these turtles. And I teach zoology. And for those who don't know what a cnidarian is, jellyfish are cnidarians. Hydra are cnidarians. Selenerate's another word for them. And I remember reading the first two, and you said parasitic cnidarian, and my brain just went what? And then the next 3 or 4 sentences were something to the effect of, I'm really sorry that your animal died, but this is insanely exciting. And blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And I was like, all right, this is the guy I definitely want doing this kind of stuff. Because, I learned something. I had no clue. And I've taught students about cnidarians forever. So it's got to be crazy to you have to feel like some kind of explorer landing on some unknown island half the time when you get these crazy disorders and disease. Because I feel like we get kind of pigeonholed into thinking it's this or it's this or it's this, and we don't really recognize this and this and this are the easy things to see. That's probably 1% of what the actual options are, and then 99% of what it could be we just don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
You know,
is that a fair assessment of how it goes down?
absolutely. I mean, if we think about it, like if you took your dog or your cat to the vet and they had 3 options to diagnose it with, like people would think it's insane. And that's the challenge. Is we're decades behind where we need to be, and we're not, there are not enough people that are well trained in this to kind of really give the best advice and knowledge. There's great reptile vets out there, but there's just not enough of them, and we're working to make that better.
and I think that's kind of, the point is there's not enough people on this on the on the front line or the back end, meaning we don't have enough research going on to fully have an idea on what's happening, but we also don't have enough vets that are trained to even be able to recognize anything more than the basics, if they're even trained to. I mean, I'm in Indiana. We got cows down pat. You know what I mean? They've nailed it. Done. Cows, pigs, horses, nailed it. But I mean, when it comes to reptile vets, it's in my area. There's one that we use, and they are the best reptile vet in the area. But they'll even tell you, I'm not a reptile vet. You know what I mean? They're not as strong. So I think that's those two problems combined, and it's like we have to get elevated in both ends. So when you mentioned earlier about the training for, new vets that are coming in, getting that, I mean, gosh, I hope there's a whole lot of that's taking place, and, more and more programs that come out, because Zac and I were actually talking before we even jumped on the episode. We were catching up, and we were discussing the number of reptiles in the United States. And I don't know if everyone's aware of it, but as of 2019, there are now more reptiles in U.S. households than there are dogs and cats combined. And now, given there's people hoarding hundreds of them in their basement, that skew that number a little bit, you know what I mean? But it's the truth. And so I guess at this point, I'm a little surprised that we still are so far behind on at least the front lines being able, having the training to diagnose a lot of this stuff. But I can fully understand why we're so far behind on the backside of the actual research and identifying so much of the new stuff, that's hitting. So just interesting piece there, from you. And I'm glad to hear, some of that's coming out. So.
Yep.
We're working on it.
There you go.
We're trying to push it forward.
Okay, so speaking of that work, so what we've requested of Dr. Oz tonight is to just kind of discuss a handful of diseases, pathogens, disorders, whatever we want to call them, that afflict our snakes, and then give his perspective, since he's the guy that's literally doing the science that leads to the new discovery and potential treatments and everything else like that, or just simply literally says there's something new here and you can actually give it a name. Because I know, like, that's a big deal. Like in crayfish land, people think, for me, that describing new species of crayfish must be so exciting, and it was like for the first 5, and now I'm on 15, and I'm like, God damn it, it's another new one. You know what I mean? Like it's like that novelty is gone. I would love to be, oh, well, that's that, and it does this and blah. So that's got to be not that it's bad. I don't want to give that, but you being on that front line, you've got to be bumping in these things and being like, what the hell am I even looking at? Is that like part of the issue? It's just, it's so new. You don't like, I try to explain to someone, it's really hard to talk to someone about something that doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
Like you can't say, like, you can't call the virus Steve, or I guess you could if you want to, but so anyway, so with the disorders that we want to talk about, which one you want to cover first? And then
we'll kind of go in the order, because I have some pictures. We'll kind of go in that order so it makes it easier to show them. I think we're going to start off talking about fungal disease in snakes. And so, fungal disease in snakes is a really, really complex topic. And when we think about fungal disease in snakes, we have to think about fungal disease that is opportunistic, or snakes get a fungal infection because husbandry isn't right. It's resulting in some changes to the skin, and then they get infections by the fungus that is present inside their enclosure under normal conditions. We see this in a lot of different animals. Aspergillus is a common fungus. It's everywhere. And when birds get stressed, they get it in their lungs and it can be fatal. So that's the one type of fungal disease. And so, that you can deal with husbandry. You can deal with scrubs and ideal conditions, maybe raising the temperature a little bit. And if you support those animals through, they're going to shed that fungal disease out. If it persists or it gets really bad, that's when you may need to step in, work with a veterinarian, get some antifungal drugs. The challenge with antifungals is they work very slow. Antibacterials, antimicrobials, they're going to kill bacteria pretty quick. Most of the antifungals we have just stop the fungi from dividing. They don't really kill them. And so you have to do really long courses to really get rid of them, but it's possible. But what we're seeing more frequently now are fungal infections in reptiles that are due to primary pathogens. These are fungi that are going to cause disease in your animals, even if your husbandry is 100% spot on. So if we can put the first picture up from the slideshow. Yeah, so this is, these are the belly scales of a pygmy rattlesnake. And we can see that the belly scales of the pygmy rattlesnake, they're irregular, they're thickened, they got that yellow crust on it. This is a wild pygmy rattlesnake that has what most of you probably know as snake fungal disease. And so snake fungal disease is caused by a fungal pathogen called Ophidiomyces ophidicola. We'll just call it, it's not the most accurate name, but for the sake, we're going to call it snake fungal disease for tonight. And it's caused by this one fungal pathogen. And so if we go to the next picture, this is a captive Florida king snake that has an Ophidiomyces infection. And this is gosh awful. There's retention of the keratin. There's a lot of crusts on it, but just look at the shape of the head of that.
I would have even recognized this at a Florida king. I mean, yeah,
that's not a king snake head. And that's because when these fungal infections get really bad and deep seated, they start to affect the bone of the head and the bone of the body. And once those kind of get established, it's really hard to treat that because, again, the drugs that we have take a long time to work, and it's hard to get those infections when they get super, super deep into the tissues. And so everyone knows kind of about snake fungal disease. It's present almost throughout the continental United States now. Southern Canada, there are infections documented in free-ranging snakes in Europe. There's captive snakes worldwide. The problem is that Ophidiomyces is the one fungus that we know the best, but there are other fungi related to it that cause primary disease in snakes, lizards, chelonians, so many of you who maybe have beardies may have heard of yellow fungus disease. Yellow fungus disease is a close relative of what causes snake fungal disease, and they're a pretty closely related group of pathogens. Those pathogens, once they get in and get established, they can easily spread within a collection, and then you have to really treat the animals or you're going to lose them, and then you're going to have this issue in your collection.
How does it spread?
So it depends on the fungus. All of those crusts are lots of tiny little fungal cylinders, and those fungal cylinders then spread out, contaminate the environment, contaminate the substrate. If you're moving things, if you're not disinfecting your hook, if you're not disinfecting your tubs, then it moves through a collection. Not as quickly as a virus, but it absolutely moves through. And the challenge with fungal disease is the time between when you see the signs and when they were initially infected can be quite a bit of time. So you may have actually missed when you spread it. And so then that can allow it to become more established in a collection. So I think the main thing I wanted to talk about this disease with for, people who are keeping colubrids is this fungus is widespread in North America. And so if you've done amphibian stuff, you know about chytrid fungus and you know about disinfecting. You don't want to bring things from outside into your frog tanks because it could kill them. The same is really true for snake fungal disease and the other related pathogens. Have either of you worked with tentacled snakes before?
Yep. Got it right now.
So tentacled snakes, they're really susceptible to fungal dermatitis. Part of it is the water pH, but tentacled snake dermatitis is called Biparaniniziopsis, which is another related fungus to Ophidiomyces. And we now know that Paraniniziopsis is in free-ranging reptiles in the southeastern US and other parts of the country as well. So again, it's that our knowledge is way behind. There's probably quite a bit of these pathogens out there, and you have to be exquisitely careful if you're adding wild-caught stock to your collection. You have to be super careful if you're taking wood or leaf litter or anything from outside and bringing it into your enclosures without an appropriate disinfection, baking, or some other stage to try and make sure that the fungus isn't there. And it's, unfortunately, this is a thing, I think the push towards enclosures that are quote unquote bioactive, which is kind of a more buzzy word. 20 years ago, we just called them Bavaria, but bioactive enclosures, it's great. It's great for the animals, but there are risks in terms of disease that have to be considered.
Okay. I've got a couple. Oh, go ahead, Clint.
And you've pretty much answered this. I just want to make sure I ask it in case there's any other pieces to state, because one thing I think we're probably going to avoid tonight is like giving vet advice. You know what I mean? We'd rather case by case. But what I do want us to try to do is discuss the best we can for each thing we talk about tonight on is what are our best preventative measures. So, for example, like when talking about if bringing in wood to decorate and to set up a cage, we know baking. Is there a chemical spray or something that you recommend that kills this? That does, if you're going to do it, here's how, do this before you put it in your cage.
The good thing about many of the fungi is that, and again, I don't want to be an advocate for any particular disinfectant or not, but most of the commonly available things, including the ones that the hobby uses routinely, like F10, are going to get
perfect.
Like but anytime you're dealing with disinfection, always remember that you have to be most aware of the contact time. Like there has to be enough contact time that it's going to allow for destruction of the fungus. And then less for F10, but for some of the others and bleach also, wash that piece of wood before you put the disinfectant on it, because the more organic debris that you get off of it, it's going to make the disinfectant work better. And that's good. Drying this stuff out bone dry is great. That for me, I have the unfortunate advantage of being in Florida where it is hot all summer long. And so I bake my stuff in either black trash bags or something. It gets hotter than Hades in there. Sometimes I'll drive around with this stuff in the bed of my truck because it's hot and it really kills it all. And so that's the summer is my natural disinfection time. I'm baking this stuff to make sure that there's nothing on it of concern, because I know that all the snakes that are going over it outside, and there's other diseases, they're contaminating all the stuff outdoors in Florida.
Is the fungal spores, are they tolerant to freezing? Like one of the things I do up here is whenever we have a polar vortex and it's going to be like -10, my driveway looks like a yard sale for a herb collection. I just shove everything out there because I know that there's a lot of things that aren't going to survive that. But there's also things that have adapted to live in this environment that go into an endospore or, basically a diapause state where they can make it through it. So Does that work?
Fungi, a lot of the fungi, so chytrid is the exception because it has to kind of move around. It needs an aqueous environment. A lot of the other fungi, like if I freeze tissue at -80 and then send that in for fungal culture, sometimes we can grow it from tissue that's been
Holy
frozen.
hell.
So
Wow.
yeah. So
Wow.
I would be more cautious with the freezing of things for the fungi in particular, because that's not going to be as reliable as desiccation and high heat or chemical disinfection.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
So I have a question, or it's kind of like a story, and then your response, if you know what I'm saying. So, and before I go any further, I am going to be advocating the way we do on CCR and giving some examples from my collection. I'm asking you to give me the grace and courtesy, listener, to not then go, oh my God, Loughman's got this diseased, horrid collection, and then reputation goes to hell and back, because we all know the scarlet letter that happens when you say, like, I have mites or whatever. So, but this is for education purposes. So this past brumation period, I brumate in the infamous garage corner that I talk about all the damn time. And what I normally do is I will get mulch. I lay it out in my driveway during the summertime when there's, sun out. It dries it because I don't want all the extra moisture. And then I bag it back up and just throw it in the garage. And then when a brumation time comes, that's what I fill my tubs with. Because I feel like the snakes need to be able to, it's the ecologist in me. I want natural behaviors. They go down in the stuff, and that's where they hang out during the wintertime. So this year, I opened up my bags of mulch, and one of those so-called dried bags was barely damp to the touch. So it hadn't dried out completely. And I put that in my brumation tubs, and snakes come out. I had a hognose snake that got what I deemed SFT almost to this point, fresh out of brumation. So it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And it got to a point where I sent a picture to I know you know him, Dr. Terry Farrell at Stetson, who studies, SFD. And I was like, what should I do with this snake? Because it was a breeder female. And he said, oh, you should kill it now. And I was like, okay. Well, I didn't. I put it in isolation, and it shed. It lost, like, it looked like it looked like it never had disease at all after it shed. And I threw that shed, actually. I put on gloves, threw it in a bag, and it is now up at school because I want, when they do histology, I want them to make slides out of it because of the crusty everything. But I've since put that female hog in complete isolation. She's living, and she's the only snake in one room in this house. Because I wanted to see, I was curious, like, will the disease manifest again? And it hasn't. So one question I have is, I'm not naive enough to think that just the fungus gave up. But is the fungus, like, when it's actually in the skin, is it in like the stratum corneum, that outermost layer, and that's where the mycelia, the little fungal bits are? Or does it go like down into the muscle and it's lying dormant, and when conditions get good again, boom, we've got a fungal infection? Or do we know?
So kind of a hybrid of all of that.
Okay.
So when these primary fungi, the onogenalian fungi, infect, they start in the stratum corneum and they extend deep. So the stratum corneum is the very outer part of the skin. That is what they're going to shed when they shed. With more severe infections, they'll go through the entire skin into the deeper skeletal muscle and then into the deeper bone. But what you mentioned about keeping that snake, kind of taking care of it and having it shed out, that is not atypical for Ophidiomyces infections. And so what we know that in the wild, that period in the winter, particularly for the viperids, when they're in the hibernacula, that's often when they get the infections. And then if it gets too bad during that period of brumation, then they can come out and be past the point of no return. But if they come out with more mild infections, they get food, they will shed that out. So they absolutely can clear infections on their own without medical treatment. It's just, as you mentioned, it's how deep did the infection get initially. Now, with snake fungal disease, usually in colubrids, when it's getting that deeper, you'll kind of feel bumps and nodules deep to the skin. You should feel them. So I think what you're doing in terms of isolate, that's all perfect. But I don't necessarily think you have to say at some point it's going to pop again.
Okay.
Because it may not. But what you mentioned about, the mulch and it not getting perfectly dry and all that, that's, again, we know it is in the environment, and that's where you need to be careful. Something else you said, and this is really, really important, and I know that I say this all the time and nobody listens to me, and that's fine. But disease in a collection should not be a scarlet letter. Because if we look at any other animal species, disease does not blacklist. Disease happens. Like that is, their animals live with disease. There is a natural interplay. And to be honest, it is a very prevailing concept in the herp hobby that if you have disease, you either say nothing and you hide it, or you just depop by selling things cheap. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons we haven't made improvements and advancements, because if and that's where I make the most significant findings, not necessarily talking with veterinarians, but talking directly with hobbyists that have something off, and then they send it to me and then I work with them. That's how we find these things that have been out there, just we didn't really talk about them.
Yeah, no, we preach that here.
Absolutely.
Like, I think it's dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, if you taking the hobby aside and just bringing in straight biology, every living thing has some kind of bug or pathogen that's gunning for it, because that's one of the best evolutionary strategies there is on planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's to basically reap the benefits of something else that's doing something you can take advantage of. Like that's evolution 101. So I've never ever looked at disease as necessarily like you suck as a keeper. I put my nerd cap on and like opportunity to learn. Like that's the way. Yeah. So
see, and I look at it from just a numbers perspective.
Yeah.
If with this, so many of these things being as communicable as they are, and knowing the size collections that there are throughout the community, these have to be so much more prevalent than what the hobby pretends. And there's none of us that can be surprised if and when something pops within our collections, because more than likely it's been sitting there for quite some time. And, we finally have stressed the animal to where it's present. And so it should be a scarlet letter.
And unless your husbandry's awful and you have just crazy bad bacterial and fungal infections, not you having disease in your collection says nothing about your skills or your work as a hobbyist. Like it happens. If we think about, again, domestic animals, how many dogs have parvovirus or things like it?
Right.
It happens that you can't have, as Zac mentioned, you can't have a living life form without having the diseases that have evolved to infect that life form. And it's just there, and it's more how you deal with it than anything else.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I really want to do, and I don't know how to do it, but I think it would be a paper that some people would read, as I would love to do something with like a curve that shows when you get to like X number of animals in your collection, just the likelihood of there being something present.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people think that number is like 200, 300 animals. And I think it's like 5. I think it's a very, very low number, because when you're bringing in the animals to a collection, unless you are like literally bringing them in from some kind of closed population that's been closed for decades, every individual coming into your population, it's adding biological variability, and within that variability, there's the possibility of there being a fungal spore, a cryptospore, a virus, a bacteria, They could have endoparasites that are present, and you know, I just think it's insane that people think, well, I've got a clean collection. I think that people actually need to think, my collection has like pathogens in it, so this is what I do. I just feel like the whole approach and zeitgeist of everything is just completely backwards.
Yep.
From a scientific, biological, statistical point of view. Like, so anyway, end rant. I think about this a lot.
And I can tell you, we don't know anywhere near enough there. I could never tell someone their collection is clean. I could say, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this. But then again, every year we find new things. And you mentioned the crayfish. Yes, I used to be excited when I found these new things. But if you then added that the new crayfish that you were finding were eating and killing other species of crayfish, that's like, it's weight on my heart that we keep finding all of these things, some of them that there's no way we're going to be able to treat, and the number of animals that we lose because of it. It is a bit demoralizing that, oh, great, here's another thing we got to worry about.
I think it's insane for anybody to declare. I also think it's irresponsible to declare, like, preach, my collection is clean when you get above a certain threshold. And I don't think that threshold is very high. And I think that would also change our culture a little bit, because it's not a big, like you said, I do not think it is a big deal to have these in disorders, whatever. I think it's our response that leads to the big deal. Like that's where the tires hit the road, is how do you react and respond. So with that being said, anything else on fungus?
No, I think that's it's something to be aware of. Again, diagnostics is important, and working with a vet, I think most importantly, is to find out, are you dealing with one of the real bad primary ones, or is it an opportunistic one? And you don't always necessarily need a vet right from the beginning. If you're starting to see fungal skin lesions, really closely assess your husbandry and look, are things too wet? Are you, that's usually the big thing, is if you're keeping the snakes in a more humid or a wetter habitat than they should be, that's one of the things that really sets up those initial infections. But if everything's spot on and you're seeing, scale lesions and nodules, it's getting things tested is important to then better understand how to deal with it.
Okay, cool. All right.
Fantastic.
Next pathogen.
Yeah. Scare me again.
So the next one we're going to talk about is one that I think everyone has heard of, but I think there's a lot of important information for it, and we Zac mentioned it earlier when we was talking, being at the Columbus Zoo, is Cryptosporidium. And so Cryptosporidium, everybody has heard of Cryptosporidium, all right? But so I'll ask both of you, what does Cryptosporidium do?
You want to go, Clint?
I will go first because I'm going to know the least. So, as far as, are you asking how it works or warning signs?
No, just like what does a snake with Cryptosporidium look like to you?
Gotcha. Okay, so if it is symptomatic, because I do know that that it can be asymptomatic. If it's symptomatic, some of the signs that I know of would be regurgitation, weight loss. And that could be even weight loss without regurgitation. Right. There's the swell that can occur, doesn't always occur, but that kind of mid-body swell. Eventually kind of lethargic. I don't think that that's necessarily something that happens until it just is almost withered away, that it really becomes lethargic. Right. But the primary things that I would be looking for would be regurgitation, weight loss, or swell.
Good.
And for a diagnostic, so if it's got symptoms, that's it. But for me, it looks like a snake. That's what a crypto snake looks like to me.
Yeah. So all of that's real. That's all true. But there's a lot of a lot more details that go into that. Yeah. And so when we say Cryptosporidium, it's not just one species of parasite that we're
Right,
talking
right,
about.
right.
And
That I do
that's
know as
the
well.
big thing,
Yeah.
Yep.
right? But the thing is that the different species of Cryptosporidium then target different parts of the gastrointestinal tract. And that is what's going to then create the different manifestation of the disease. And so Cryptosporidium serpentis is the one that is, the best characterized Cryptosporidium that is infecting the stomach and the stomach only. And that is the Cryptosporidium that's going to give you regurgitation and or that mid-body swelling. If we can throw up the first picture or the next picture in the PowerPoint, right? So this is the open stomach of a corn snake. And it's hard to see without a control, but the mucosa, the inner lining of that stomach is much, much too thick. And that's because what the parasite does is, and we can go to the next picture. And I'm not going to show a lot of pictures of under the microscope, but this is the stomach under the microscope. And all of those really super red, pink cells that you were seeing are inflammatory cells. And the rest of it is a inner lining of the stomach that has become proliferative. All of those cells are dividing excessively. And if you can see, there's tiny little blue dip dots that are lining the surface of that stomach. That's the Cryptosporidium, and that's Cryptosporidium serpentis. And what it actually does is it affects the stomach. It causes the epithelial cells of the stomach to divide excessively. There's inflammation there. And essentially what happens is two things. The lumen of the stomach gets smaller because of all the proliferation of the mucosa surrounding it. And so that's why the snakes can only eat smaller than expected food items, because if it's normal size, it's going to trigger the regurgitation response because there's not enough room in that stomach for that normal size food item. But it's also then causing the gastric epithelial cells to change, and you don't have enough of the cells that are secreting all of the enzymes that break the food down. So they can't accept big enough food, and then the food that's in there, they don't digest properly. So that is one of the reasons that they will lose weight.
Gotcha.
But Cryptoserpentis is the only one that's going to cause regurgitation and mid-body swelling. If we go to the next picture, and this I can only show under a microscope, this is the small intestine. And the small intestine is hyperplastic, so those cells have divided way too much. It's inflamed. And then we also see the little round dots on the surface of that mucosa. This is Cryptosporidium of a different variety. And this, in this particular case, this was Cryptosporidium varani. And that is the best characterized intestinal Cryptosporidium. But this snake is just going to present with weight loss. And it's only going to present with weight loss when the disease is advanced. And so before that, you're not going to see much in this snake. If you are taking, weekly or bi-weekly weights, you may start to see that weight drop slowly. But if you're just doing visual checks, it's going to be a long time that animal has this disease before you actually start to note it dropping visually in terms of its body condition. And the challenge here is there's a number of these different intestinal Cryptosporidia that can then infect lizards and snakes. And some of them don't seem to cause disease, and others do. But if you look in the literature, that we don't know jack enough to be able to say that. We are still actively collecting that data. There was just a paper that came out of a new Cryptosporidium that's been found in geckos. We know that there's a number of Cryptosporidia that appear in certain geckos, particularly Europlatus geckos. We don't know how important it is. And again, there's a lot of variation out there. And so identifying animals are sick is very hard. And then diagnosing animals that are sick is also hard, because the tests that you would run on this, particularly the PCR tests, you really need to have a test that tells you what cryptosporidium it is.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, the other thing that throws kind of a monkey wrench into this is rodents also have cryptosporidium.
Yeah.
And if you're feeding rodents with cryptosporidium, it won't do anything to the snakes, but it'll cause them to test positive. And so if you don't actually sequence or determine exactly what species of cryptosporidium it is, you may get false positives because of rodent cryptosporidium pass-through. And so it is a very, very challenging thing to truly work out. You have to have good diagnostic testing. You got to identify it. In the work, I have seen a number of snakes where they have concurrent gastric and intestinal crypto. And this is kind of just for the nerdy parts of things. The stomach crypto of a snake is more closely related to the stomach crypto of a mouse than it is to the intestinal crypto of a snake. Yep. And so that's how different these things are. We just kind of lump them together because, they have a similar name. So it's very, very different. And that's going to be really fundamentally important for when we finally, hopefully, have treatment for this thing. Because right now, there's no treatment for cryptosporidiosis. There's no good drugs that we have that work on this. I am very, very hopeful that is actually going to change. Because there was an article, I don't know if either of you saw this, was an article in the New York Times several months ago. Do you know where the drug Ozempic was actually characterized from?
Yes. Gila monsters.
Gila monsters, right? So studies of Gila monsters is what led them to find Ozempic. And one of the main researchers who was involved in the discovery of Ozempic was very concerned when one of the Gila monsters had cryptosporidium and there was nothing they could do for it. So that researcher, super, super smart guy, is in Michigan, and they are doing next level work screening cultured cryptosporidium against a high, massive library of different antiprotozoal drugs. I think that's really the best shot we have at coming up with treatment for this. But herein lies the problem. If they find one specific drug that works for Cryptovarani, which is the one they have in culture, it doesn't guarantee it's going to work for Cryptoserpentis or all of the other cryptosporidium that we know about. Because the more specialized drugs you start testing, the more specific their target of action, and there may be specific responses to one crypto that you don't see in another. And so that's why, again, when you have sick animals, when you've lost animals in your collection, this is why necropsies and testing can be so powerful, because that can help you identify what you may be dealing with, and then you can work with someone to come up with a diagnostic testing strategy, try and identify who has it. And again, as Zac mentioned, it doesn't mean you have to kill everyone. With certain cryptosporidium, it may be more of an issue than others, but at least you can then segregate your collection, work through it in a biosecure way. You work with the clean snakes first, the dirty snakes last, and you can kind of work through this. Yes. And that's where cryptosporidiosis is an insidious disease. There's no way around it, but there's a lot more nuance to the actual disease than I think what people recognize.
So when I first battled this thing, it was 2018. I just got back into the reptile thing with the Zoosci collection. I brought in it's the irony of quarantine. I brought in a snake to quarantine, but the problem was every snake we had was in quarantine because it was a new collection. And in retrospect, what I should have had was like a Q1, a Q2, a Q3, just because everybody was new. So, and I was able to like dial it into the exact animal I think gave it to our animals. But we obviously, being a university, we have like a next gen sequencer, and I've got some pretty whiz kid molecular biologists that I work with, and they're all microbiology people, and they all can do next gen sequencing and PCR and all that stuff. So I was taking poop down to them and basically They were buying kits, and we were able to get it to sequence like 3 times. And I will never forget getting that date, like it back from the lab we sent it out to for sequencing, the results, because when we got it back for this black-tailed indigo snake, I was expecting it to say Cryptosporidium serpentis, Cryptosporidium verinae, Cryptosporidium parvum, Cryptosporidium hominid, like all the things that are known. And what we actually got back was the results showed that in that fecal sample, there was Cryptosporidium serpentis, there was Cryptosporidium species 1, there was Cryptosporidium species 2, there was Cryptosporidium species 3, species 8, species 12. There were like I think that there were 12 to 14 different taxa in that snake. And at the time I thought like we did something, I was not expecting that. So we sent it and did the whole thing again and got all 14 again the second time. So the other thing that like that taught me is that it's that thing we keep talking about. We know Verinae is bad. We know Serpentis is bad, but there could be a crypto in there that is actually the one that's lethal. But we can identify Serpentis and it manifests itself. So maybe that's the one. Like, I feel like there could be things masquerading in there. Is that am I barking up a wrong tree, or is that a good way of thinking, or what?
No. I mean, I think it's a good way of thinking. I think that it may be the obverse of that, though, where the Cryptosporidium species 1 through whatever, they may be the ones that are in the low quantities and not doing as much. And because the benefit I have, people who are just relying on molecular diagnostics alone, that result, what you get doesn't make entire sense. Whereas for me, I've looked at the stomach under the microscope. I've looked at the intestine under the microscope. I usually keep those 2 samples separate so I can run PCR on the tissue from what I'm looking at separately. So I get a pretty good idea of when I have it, which one is which. And but again, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
There's a Cryptosporidium, Japanese grass snake Cryptosporidium, or KN732, which is called that because it was first described in Japanese grass snakes. But that'll cause lesions just like Verinae, and that one even goes up into the gallbladder and does gallbladder stuff that we don't necessarily see with the others either. So again, there's so much there's the exciting part of that, and then the really scary part of that.
Right.
But yeah, there's so much we don't know.
And I had a grad student. Unfortunately, she didn't finish, and I wish she would have. I haven't had many that done that, but she wanted to do a molecular project, and this is when we were doing that. And we, I believe we bought Cryptosporidium muris that had been deactivated, so it wasn't pathogenic, and it wasn't pathogenic to the snakes. And I just wanted to see kind of what you were saying, like give them a crypto that creates a false positive and see if it goes through. So we had a bunch of snakes that were babies. So they had naive stomachs and gastrointestinal systems. And we basically inoculated them with this non-pathogenic form of crypto into the pinky mice. So their first meal had crypto. And we were able to figure out like the dose. So like X number of spores. Now, granted, crypto is so small that the smallest one I think was like 500 spores or something crazy. But we were able to show that even at the smallest dosage, she was able, using fluorescence microscopy, to show in the feces, there they are. They went straight through, So it was a really kind of cool study to just show, like, and that was mouse crypto. I will never forget when we were told initially to buy these antigen tests, and that was what we would use to determine if the snakes had crypto. And that same grad student, on a whim, I don't know what possessed her to do this, but I'm so happy she did it because she opened up everybody's eyes. She took a mouse turd from rodent company will remain nameless, and did a crypto assay, like the antigen test for that. And it lit up like a Christmas tree. Like it was. And so then we did the she was doing the acid fast staining too, the staining you do to see them. And that was another eye opener, was like, these mice are like infested with Cryptosporidium, which, if you think about, if you're only relying on like the kind of antigen test, and unfortunately not crapping on vets, But since I've talked on several podcasts about crypto, a lot of people reach out to me, and I always ask, like, well, how did you figure out that your snake has crypto? And I've had about 30 to 40% of them say, well, the veterinarian did a test in the office. And if they're doing a test in the office, that's not PCR, and that's not good. I guess it could be microscopy. But then they say, it's probably or whatever, and it was antigens. And I tell like, just no, don't do that because it's going right through them, from the mice, and it's gonna cause that test to pop.
Yeah. It's not a sensitive way of. If you're trying to identify snakes that you then want to do more in-depth testing, that's maybe but you don't make that diagnosis from either an acid fast stain or a fecal float. You can't, because their diet may have it and it's going to look the same.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Crazy. Any more with the slides with crypto?
No, I just had those 3 pictures, I think. Yeah.
Man. So one thing that I've noticed with crypto, because we do study it. So at West Liberty, total transparency, we had it relatively early on, and initially I was euthanizing the snakes, and I reached a point where I was like, I have a really hard time killing this corn snake that's not showing any signs. It's fecal feces where it looked like normal snake poop. There was nothing. But when we sent it away, it popped. So we actually talked to a couple zoos, and there were some zoos that were creating crypto wards. And so we basically got a room in a basement in a building we're never in. So it is across campus, only grad students and zoo side staff work in it. But when we get a positive snake that is asymptomatic, whatever that means, but looks relatively healthy, it goes into that ward. And then anything that was near it, we make a judgment call. Like, should we consider this positive? Because we just don't want it in the collection. But our corn snake collection right now is in the crypto ward. And this past year, we put them through, we cycled them, we bred them, we got babies. There's no real evidence that it's passed from parent to child with the eggs. I don't want to say that definitively, but biologically, it seems like extremely low likelihood to me that that's reproductive tract, gastrointestinal tract, different tracts. There's only a little bit of common tissue there when that egg pops out. But I was curious, like the brumation process and the reproductive process, it's stressful. So I was curious, like, is this just going to make all these animals pop? Because we know definitively some of them are crypto carriers. And we were getting negatives and positives and negatives because we were just testing them for curiosity's sake. So stress. Do you have any opinions on the role of stress with crypto, or we just don't know yet, or what? Because I'm barking up trees with stress.
I think that with crypto, there's less of a impact of stress, because crypto seems, and again, we don't have all the data for this, but crypto seems to almost be a linear relationship between the number of parasites I see and the amount of tissue reaction. And that seems to be more time mediated than stress mediated. These are organisms that live on the surface of the cell. They're for the real nerds out there, they're technically intracellular because they live between the 2 parts of the lipid membrane of the cell, but they're not in the cytoplasm. So they're intracellular, but not entirely intracellular. And, there's not much that the snake immune system is doing to the actual parasite. And so I think it's more a matter of, you have to have so many numbers, and those numbers, as they increase, that's when you start to see the disease. So I think there's less of a stress association with crypto, but that is just my gut based on what I see under the microscope. Those controlled studies haven't been done. At least it seems that way for C. serpentis and C. varani. But, the challenge is, as you mentioned, is in low-level infections, those animals are positive, but they're going to shed organisms intermittently. And so if we think about how tiny the organism is and how big a snake poop is, if it's got a low amount of parasites and you sample the wrong part of the snake poop, or it's just, you're going to miss it. And so that's where, you kind of need sequential testing before you say an animal is positive or negative. And that's, another thing, if you have snakes in quarantine and you're doing disease testing, one test for a lot of things, particularly crypto, isn't enough to say, yeah, it's disease free.
I have heard keepers say, when I've talked to them about crypto, oh, it's just a Ponzi scheme. They just want more money when they tell us we got to do 3 tests, and my scientist's brain explodes, and then I die. I'm like, no, you're playing a probability game here, dude, and you might not have gotten the spore out of the turd. Like that's it's literally like the arrogance in that statement just drives me insane. So anyway,
it's not a pile of crypto. It's a pile of poo.
Right.
The crypto's hiding somewhere in there.
That snake's going to be like, it's going to probably look sick, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very sick. Very sick. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's really cool. I didn't realize that Verine made them appear emaciated. That's
because so Serpentis is going to affect their digestion. Varani is going to affect their absorption. So that intestine then changes, and it's not getting the nutrients from the digesta, and so they just slowly waste away without any of the regurg signs or things like that.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that either. So it's, know the signs to kind of look out for, but I didn't realize it was because of 2 different strains, causing the different symptoms. So that's you just taught us something, buddy. Thank you.
All righty.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts on crypto?
No, I have high hopes that we're going to get into diagnostic territory, into treatment territory in the future. And I think that's going to be a real major positive thing for reptile health, because if we can start treating these animals, it's going to kind of reverse, it's not going to make crypto no longer an issue, but it's really going to kind of kill that beast that is right now an untreatable animal and sometimes collection killer.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. All right. Third disease.
All right. So the third disease is an important one. This is a new one. This is one. So we're getting ready to put the paper in, hopefully in the next couple of months. But this is one I talked a little bit about it at IHS. Zac Loughman gave some slides when he was at Colubrid Fest. This is a disease that I think everybody with snakes, and particularly with colubrids, needs to be aware of. This is a disease that, I ran out of room anyway, but this is my collection is closed and will remain closed because I am very, very scared of this disease. And this is a viral disease that is caused by a picornavirus. And so picornaviruses, everyone is probably familiar with them. They're just not, they don't know they're familiar with them. But essentially, these Ophidian picornavirus, these snake picornavirus infections, are this snake version of polio. Just like human polio, polio in humans is also a picornavirus. It's just a different picornavirus. But what we have seen now for the past few years, and again, this was a disease that we really started to understand because a really astute hobbyist contacted me and said something's wrong with my snakes, and it took a lot of work and multiple rounds of next generation sequencing before we really figured it out. And now that we've figured it out and we've started testing for it, this is a disease that really does concern me greatly. And so the signs, and I had a couple of videos, we're not going to be able to show them, but the main signs in these snakes are neurologic signs. And so when we think of neurologic signs in snakes, we think classically of inclusion body disease or rhabdarinavirus, mostly in pythons, but also in boas. They stargazing, that when you turn them on their backs, they can't flip themselves back over. We also see a lot of twitchiness in the snakes with these Ophidian picornavirus infections. So if you're holding the snake and it's jerking its head in an abnormal fashion, or it's jerking its tail, they can't turn themselves. Yeah, so unfortunately, we can't really play the video, but the snake on the right is essentially a limp noodle. That snake has complete flaccid paralysis. The snake, and that is a Leonis.
Let's say it
Yeah,
looks like
Lamprepeltis
Leonis, yeah.
Leonis. And then on the left, that's a jungle corn. So that's a Pantherophis Lamprepeltis hybrid. And that one had very, very spastic, jerky movements. And so what we've done a lot of necropsies on these snakes, and they all have really significant inflammation in their brain and their spinal cord, and they're having death of their neurons in their brain and their spinal cord. And when neurons die, they don't come back. And so that's where the human polio, you get paralyzed. That's what's happening in these snakes. And we first documented it primarily in Lamprepeltis species, and then Pantherophis. The concern now is that in this what seems like it's just one virus, one viral species with some diversity, we are seeing fatal CNS disease in viperids of both North American Crotalus origin, as well as, unfortunately, Asian Russell's vipers are affected. In colubrids, Heterodon, Lamprepeltis, Pantherophis, and really, really concerningly, we also have now detected this in ball pythons. And so that is a virus that's able to jump between a lot of different snake species, and really important snake species in terms of the hobby. And it progresses, these snakes become, paralyzed, and then a small number seem to be able to survive with some degree of neurologic deficit, but many of them succumb to this disease. And it can move really rapidly through a collection. There was a vet that I've become good friends with. He was dealing with this, and what happened is there was a power failure during the winter that caused temperature drops. And so anytime you have a temperature drop with a snake, that is an immunosuppressive event that's going to cause potential disease to pop. Mm-hmm. And within a couple of weeks of that loss of power and the heat going off to the cage heat, they had been fed not too long before the heat went off. He started having animals pop with neurologic disease, and that rapidly moved through his collection of Lamprepeltis and Pantherophis to the point where he had to euthanize all of the snakes. This is a bad disease. And it is of major concern. You have to quarantine your animals. I know that it is in the pet trade. I know that we've documented it more than once. So the Heterodon, that the hognose that we documented, was bought from a reptile show, exhibited neurologic signs. The owner was concerned, euthanized it, and it had the virus. We worked with a large zoological institution. They had recently acquired some king snakes. One was positive on a quarantine screen. We did a necropsy. It had stuff. I know that it's out there, and people just need to be very, very careful. And I think, picornaviruses are challenging viruses because so viruses come in different flavors. And one of the major ways of categorizing viruses is whether or not they're surrounded by a fatty outside layer. Viruses surrounded by a fatty outside layer are more susceptible to drying. They're easier to kind of break down. The ones that don't have it persist longer in the environment and can be incredibly infectious. And unfortunately, this is one of those that doesn't have that lipid membrane. And so it is of concern. One of the interesting things, or the cool things, is have either of you heard of Zonata disease?
Yes.
Yes. I can't tell you anything about it, but I've heard the term.
I hadn't heard of zoonotic disease until one of my friends who's a veterinarian said, "Have you ever heard of zoonotic disease?" I said, "No." So he described zoonotic disease. It's been, there's kingsnake.com posts on this from like 2000 that describe, excessive shedding. The spectacle or the eye cap looks like it's been rubbed by sandpaper. They show neurologic signs, and most of them die and become paralyzed. Some of them recover. In that old post, they said that they've even seen that there was even wild zonata in the mountains that had similar signs, although it's very anecdotal. And so when he's describing these signs to me, I was like, this sounds a heck of a lot like our Ophidian picornaviruses. And I don't think he really believed me. He's like, nah, this has been. So I got some snakes. I did necropsies, and under the microscope, it looked like that picornavirus. And we tested it using a PCR that I designed that recognized all the strains that we had detected so far in the rattlesnakes and the lamprey, and it was negative. But I knew that brain looked like it had it. So we did next generation sequencing on that. And zoonotic disease is caused by a relative of the picornavirus that we see more commonly causing disease in the hobby. And it's a relative of that. So zonata, that picornavirus has been present in zonata in the hobby for 25 years plus. But now there's kind of what seems to be a much nastier cousin in the family that is able to infect a broader diversity of snakes and cause fatal neurologic disease.
All right.
And it's just, one thing we haven't talked much about, and I think it's an entirely different discussion and what to do, is you have to quarantine your animals. And reptile quarantine is a number that a lot of people are going to have trouble dealing with, and maybe reptile quarantine at minimum should be 6 months, and if not longer. And I know that that's a number that's really hard for people with large collections to do, but when we talk about things like crypto, when we talk about everything happens slower in reptiles, everything. And that includes disease progression. And so a lot of these things, even if you're doing that PCR testing, if they're low level, you may get false negatives. For the sake and health of your other animals, you need to have appropriate quarantine procedures in place so that you're not potentially spreading things from your new animals to your existing stock.
I have so the virus. How do you kill it, and how is it transmitted? Or
so
you don't know?
That's all still stuff that we need to figure out. For how to kill it, I think that there's really good data. I think honestly, there's tons of studies out there for poliovirus in humans. We're following the same thing. Another kind of related, a little more distant, not as close, but the caliciviruses and the noroviruses are what caused the cruise ship diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are hundreds of disinfection protocols so that people who are on cruises aren't shitting their brains out by the time that they leave. And so following those, it's your bleach is going to work. Your F10 is going to work. Ethanol, if you're using alcohol, maybe less confident in that. Your peroxide is going to work. Disinfection is going to be straightforward. Transmission, there's probably a fecal oral component to it. We can detect it on cloacal swabs, so it's probably moving through the GI tract. The challenge is that the virus particles themselves are going to be pretty stable. So if you're not disinfecting, there's going to be a long window of time where those particles can infect then other animals. And knowing what we know for other picornas, they're producing probably a lot of infectious particles and passing that in their feces.
I've got a couple questions. One, and I'm assuming no, but are you ever able to trace back where some of this originated? Because it sounds like you're catching it from popped up in captive collections. Just wondering if you ever been able to backtrack it.
So that is, to me, and that's an area where I've been trying to do a little bit more work. That's where, these things don't just happen in captive collections. Where do we trace it back to? So I think, the Zonata virus is potentially a good example of, wild snakes having this. I don't know where this picorna came from, but we go back and talk about crypto. I can find crypto in wild snakes in the southeastern U.S. There's a paper on it in Nerodia water snakes in Texas. We just put in, we're about to submit a paper focusing on the next thing we're going to talk about, the pentastone parasites. But we have Cryptoserpentis in a wild pygmy rattlesnake causing a little bit of disease. We know it can cause disease in eastern diamondback rattlesnakes. The craziest thing is I had been doing a fair number of coral snake necropsies. And coral snakes is not something that you normally think of. Well, you would get access to necropsies, but in Florida, coral snakes bite a lot of dogs. And when they bring the dogs into the emergency room, a lot of people kill the snake and bring the snake with the dog for identification. I started doing necropsies on those coral snakes. Coral snakes have more Cryptoserpentis in their stomach than I have ever seen in a snake before, with absolutely zero evidence of disease. And so I think, again, it's a lot of these things are free-ranging reptile things that either in the stress of captivity and or more likely spillover of the pathogen into closely related species, that then it can cause more dramatic disease because they haven't evolved the immune response to deal with it. That's how we see the diseases in captivity. One of the really cool things, this isn't a colubrid thing, but one of my current master students is from Peru, and we were doing viral disease screening in snakes of the southeastern U.S. looking for viruses, but he wanted to screen for some viruses in Peru, and we found Reptorhinavirus, which is the causative agent of inclusion bias disease in boas, one of the most common circulating strains of Reptorhinavirus in wild snakes from Peru. And Peru moves those. Peru is a major exporter to different markets. So again, these are all likely representative of infections of wild reptiles of a particular species or particular genera that probably don't cause dramatic disease. But then in the mixing of either importation and the mixing in collections and the mixing and then distribution through, it just gets moved around, and then that's how we start to see these diseases.
Man,
and again,
go ahead. Sorry,
go ahead.
It's unfortunate. It's super easy for these things to fly under the radar. I guarantee you that this is not a new virus. It's just now that we have the test to be looking for it, and we can do it. As a pathologist before, like, it's a snake with neurologic disease. Test it for Reptorhinavirus and furlovirus. It's negative. We'll never figure out what it is. Next case. And that's where I'm trying to stop that and to further investigate these kind of red herrings, and that's what's going to increase our database of potential pathogens.
You mentioned the story of the temperature drop came back up, and then that's what kind of triggered that in your friend's collection there, and that was the polio kind of virus that did that, right?
Yep.
Okay. Do you think that that the virus was already present there in the snake, and that temperature drop stressed it to spike the symptoms to kick in? Okay, so with that in mind, and this is just a thought from, it's talking about the quarantine procedures. And I guess it's going to be kind of one of these gray areas, but it almost seems like when quarantining, would it be ethical or in our best interest to cause stress to see, because it's, again, if these things are sitting there for a while and the stress is what makes them then become visible and symptomatic, if it's almost like, do we have a stress induced event in our quarantine procedure to see if these things pop?
Yeah, that's something that that Steve Tillis and I have talked quite a bit about, because the first, we talked about discovering crayfish. My first reptile disease that I discovered was serpentovirus, or ball python nidovirus. And so I've been working with those viruses now for a long time. What?
I said that's quite the first disease for you to discover.
but again, it had been there before. It's just, and we were one of two groups that came out with at the same time, so other people are looking for it. But when we have talked and we've put this forward when we wrote a review article about Ophidian serpentoviruses, we did suggest that as a potential thing, because we know that the virus replication increases with the stress of a cold shock. And whether, the ethical question is, we're not talking about putting these animals in the refrigerator cold shock. We're talking about dropping them 10 degrees lower than their POTZ for a number. I don't necessarily think that is a bad idea. That we've both talked about that. If you're really trying to screen for them, is to put a little bit of stress on them to see if you can then allow these things. Because really what's happening is, it's not so much that you want the virus to pop to cause disease, but what you do want is the virus replication to increase so that it is more reliably detected on a PCR test. So you don't want to just cold stress them and say, does it get a snotty nose? No. But if you're kind of doing that in conjunction with PCR screening for known things, or looking for, I don't necessarily think that is a bad idea. Now, that's not an idea that is currently accepted. And I think that it needs to be investigated, kind of carefully. We've done investigations with the increased temperature and what that can do. Looking at decreased temperature as a way of increasing the sensitivity of detecting for some of these viral pathogens may not be a bad idea. But again, you have to do it under the right conditions, and you have to be proactively doing the PCR testing, not just looking for clinical signs of disease.
Right.
How we go about that specific way and the temp, that's all, it's an open box. We don't know, but I think that's a great idea. And it's something that both Steve and I have chatted about before, because it may help increase our ability to detect these things for some of these more, because in that collection we talked about, there probably, what it was is there was probably one, and in talking, we identified maybe a potential snake that introduced it. But when that cold temperature shock happened, it allowed that one snake that had a low level infection probably to start producing a boat ton of virus. And then there were holes in the biosecurity that allowed for it to start to be moved within the rack system. And once that starts to happen, with ball python serpento, that you could watch it move through a rack, and then it would move to the next rack over, and then that's the way that these things kind of spread the best.
Damn.
Yeah.
Quick question about the serpentovirus. This is something I've always wondered. I know with crypto that phorid flies are a vector, and then phorids get into reptile. Are phorids at all vectors with anything we're talking about, or it's unknown? I know crypto's one, but for these viruses, I'm always trying to figure out how do we get ahead of the actual spread.
Yeah. I think that there's not great evidence for any of the things, rock hard evidence, but if you think about it, these are tiny little pathogens that then, if the animals are walking on poop, or they're walking through the goobers from the snake, from the ball python, and then they move to they're essentially serving as mechanical vectors for fomites and could potentially allow the movement. But that's coupled then with if you're not disinfecting your tongs that you're using to feed the rodents. One of the big things that we saw that was the best way of moving serpento through a collection was just, this snake didn't eat I'm going to take the rodent and then move it in. And that's, yes, you're saving money on the road, but you're spreading stuff very, very quickly. So yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I think they do. Just same way, that snake mites probably play a role in the movement of a number of these different things. I think the forward flies also have a role in the movement.
I literally just today, because with us having this new intern and talking about why we do the different procedures we do, changing gloves with each rack and just things like that. And I was talking to Corey and literally said, do you know what the most dangerous thing in our collection is? And she goes, the flies. I go, exactly. Forward flies. Yeah. Those are always, to me, the most dangerous thing that we have back there.
I hate those.
Because if there is something, that's going to be the carrier. That's going to be what moves it.
Snake might suck, but I don't think we give the forwards anywhere near the, I don't know, Death Star they deserve.
And you can't get rid of them. I mean, there's no way you can. I mean, I've got two little lighted traps running in my room all the time, and I know because when the power goes out, which happens with some frequency, the fans turn off. Within a day or two, I can see the flies flying around because I know that the power went out because those traps aren't working. And they're everywhere. Yeah. So yeah.
And that's what I've always said. I mean, it's like the only way you can't get rid of them. The only way you can even attempt to fight them is you literally have to spot clean every cage every day. That's the only way to keep their numbers reduced is, try to take away their food. That's it. But even then, you're still going to have them. They're still going to be around, just not in the numbers of, if you missed a pile for 2 days.
Well, one of my quests, and I'm doing it, is this new conservation center. It had an apartment behind it. Well, that apartment is now my office. So I have a rather large office, and of course, 6-foot Metazotics VE enclosures went in. So I'm bringing in new snakes. Old snakes are moving into the new space. They're looking for one space to another, but I'm not I am going to personally put everything in there, and the snakes are going to be unbagged outside. I'm going to look for the damn fly and then move them. And I just want to see okay, this was day 0 going into winter in West Virginia. How long does it take for little bastards to show up? That's literally what I want to know. All right. Well, that's horrifying. Okay.
Yeah.
So final pathogen, and this one's a winner. This one is, and I think the good news is that this one is going to have a limited impact probably on most captive reptiles. My giant concern with this pathogen is what it's going to do to wild reptiles. Yeah. And so if you want to pull up that last picture, this is some of you have probably heard of this. It's been in the media to a fair degree. This is snake lungworm or snake invasive pentastomes. And this is an invasive pentastome called Rhylotiella orientalis. And so we have pentastomes in our North American reptiles, Sabekia in turtles and crocodilians. We have Porocephalus in our snakes, but Rhylotiella is an Asian parasite. It's not supposed to be here. But now in Florida, we have Rhylotiella orientalis, which is kind of the biggest one of concern currently, that most likely, though it's not 100%, was likely accompanied the Burmese pythons when they were established in South Florida. It's a normal parasite of that species, low numbers, doesn't do much. And then it started to infect native snakes in Florida. And so this is a black racer from Alachua County, where UF is, and this poor racer had 90 pentastomes in its lungs. And these are blood-sucking parasites. You have 90 blood-sucking parasites feeding off of your lungs, the blood in your lungs, and that is, we're still trying to figure out exactly what these parasites are doing, but I think it's very hard to imagine a way where that many parasites
eating blood is not going to have some sort of effect on host fitness, some degree of immunosuppression, just by the fact that they're constantly eating the white blood cells, and the snake is going to have to keep making it. And the white blood cells are the cells that are protecting it against infections from other things. These parasites, so the good thing about these parasites is they have a very complex life cycle. That means that the snake is infected by eating another animal that's infected with an intermediate stage of the parasite that then ingested either an egg or another animal that had an intermediate stage of the parasite. Usually when we have these parasites with complex life cycles, it means that they're not going to become established and invasive. That is not the case for Rhylotiella, unfortunately. And so Terry Farrell at Stetson, we mentioned him earlier, he's done a lot of great work. We know that these parasites are able to infect anoles in Florida, brown anoles particularly, as well as some anurins, cockroaches. And then those intermediate hosts are then eaten by our native snakes, and they can get really severe infections. So what started off as a parasite that we believed was restricted to South Florida in the range of the Burmese python moved to Central Florida, moved to North Florida up towards Gainesville. We published the first report in Gainesville in 2020. The paper so there's a great grad student at University of Central Florida, Jenna Palmisano. She used to be working with Terry. She's working in Anna Savage's lab at University of Central Florida, and she's organized a group of researchers that have documented this parasite going right up to the border with Georgia and Alabama. This parasite is moving. It's moving quickly, and it's not going to be a Florida problem only for very long. And the impact of these parasites on our native snakes is kind of a question mark. We just are submitting a paper looking at pygmy rattlesnakes that seem to be pretty heavily affected by this parasite, and the concurrent diseases they have. They have viral pneumonias. They've got snake fungal disease. There's a lot going on. It's definitely affecting our native snakes. And the concern is then how far this moves. So in terms of captive snakes, we have documented, so there was a Nerodia in Michigan that was purchased as a captive bred snake that was probably a wild-caught Nerodia from Florida, and it had the pentastomes in it. But unless that Nerodia is continuing to eat the intermediate host, its infection is not going to get worse. The parasites are not going to divide in the snake and get higher in number. The challenge, though, is really probably mainly the brown anoles. Now, brown anoles are an invasive species in Florida. They've been here for over 100 years, but they're widespread throughout Florida. And you both probably know how easy it is to purchase brown anoles from most pet stores across the country. And most of them are collected in Florida. And the incident rate of the parasite in those brown anoles is really, really high. So that causes two potential issues. One, it introduces a potential for contamination of the environment with intermediate hosts that then could be ingested by other snakes that then start to kick off cycle in other parts of the country. If this thing gets out west, then it could be problematic with the diversity of reptiles we have out there. But then the other is, there are a number of colubrids that are not rodent feeders, and feeding them rodents is not healthy for them. And having a reliable source of, a non-rodent diet, a lot of people rely then on brown anoles, and that could, if you're continuously feeding, especially if you're feeding live brown anoles, you could potentially be inoculating your snake over and over again with these parasites, and we may see mortality because of it.
That was going to be my question, on the brown anole as a feeder. Does freezing take care of this issue? So freezing should take care of the pentastome. Okay. But brown anoles have a whole nother different disease that we're dealing with in Florida that is a bacterial disease that is a really scary disease because it's a bacteria that's resistant to most antimicrobials.
and it just destroys the brown anoles. And that disease, I'm actually more concerned about not being resistant to freezing, and that then would be another potential disease source if you're feeding it to other reptiles. So in my opinion, you need to avoid feeding wild caught brown anoles as a feeder. A former classmate of mine works for one of the big, and I'm not saying their name because I haven't gotten clearance yet, and I need to put, but one of the real big box pet stores, I worked with him. They no longer are selling brown anoles culling from Florida at their stores nationwide. And so that's a good thing, but we need to be aware of this. Now, the other thing that we have found recently that is very super concerning is in the paper that we have final revisions on, hopefully will come out soon. We have now documented this parasite infecting a pet bearded dragon in Florida that had access to outdoors, as well as causing fatal disease in a young Aldabra tortoise that was outdoors and eating intermediate hosts and got a fatal infection. So this has then, a potential for having much broader implications in captive reptiles. And I have a big concern of what this may end up doing with chelonians, because while we're, we can get the snakes and keep them indoors and keep them captive. A lot of our tortoises, they need to be outside. Keeping them indoors with just UV isn't what's going to keep them healthy. And what does this mean for tortoises as well? And so this is a bad disease. For those of you that have, that your collection's primarily colubrids, you just want to make sure the origins of your snake, it truly, if the seller is not someone and you don't know a history, and the snake's not priced right, and it's a captive bred, consider that maybe it's not actually captive bred and that it may be carrying this and other parasites with it. But then also be careful with what you're feeding that has wild caught origins. And I know that that's a hard thing. I mean, not everyone can set up a giant mourning gecko colony to feed their lizard feeders, but you have to take into consideration that they're wild animals. They're going to have parasites that could then potentially cause issues in what you're feeding.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
this was when it was funny at IHS. I had a conversation prior to this topic with our friend Channing, and Channing, who was there at IHS, says that he had set up a colony of clean brown anoles. And he was producing them, and so he had, I forget where he said he got them, but I mean, again, clean brown anoles. And, my thought, cool, awesome. But I was also sitting there thinking, it's like, I don't know if I want to take the time or space to set up breeding anoles, because again, they're so readily available. And because we keep, I keep house geckos, set up of house geckos, mourning geckos, 5-line skinks, fence lizards, because we deal with not just the only thing that's eating lizards consistently is going to be the paradise snake that we keep here, but otherwise it's all for scenting purposes is why I want, those different lizards here. However, it was funny because, he said that he's like, so if you're interested in getting a few to be able to start a clean colony, just let me know. I'm like, okay, yeah, didn't give it much thought. Then we listened to this talk and I turn around, Channing, about those clean brown anoles. Let's talk.
So the good thing is if you want to set up a brown anole colony, right? The brown anoles can be wild caught. You can start your colony with them. They're not going to be able to pass that because the parasite that's in those brown anoles is the intermediate stage, which isn't going to go any farther. So you can start a clean colony from dirty anoles, but just you have to be careful then of the bacterial disease that we know is in them in restricted areas of Florida, but is also spreading, and its host range is also increasing, and it's also infecting captive reptiles now also. So it's the challenges with dealing with wild animals and then the things they may have.
Okay.
Did I fulfill the needs of a spooktacular
I
discussion?
think so. I think now it's like, hopefully everyone feels what we got a taste of there at IHS, and how puckered we were when we walked out of that room. But I mean, it goes to show there's a lot of out there, and it's as we joke and say, this was supposed to be a show that is going to scare everybody and spook everybody. It at the same time, there, as we said earlier, there's so much already out there. That we just, that's what really we need to accept more than anything is there's probably something already in your collection, and don't be ashamed or afraid whenever you see signs to get the testing done, to reach out for help, to find out what steps you can take, because that's really what this episode's about. It's awareness more than anything. And it's, Zac has talked about what he's dealt with out there. I've said there's been many times that there's been times I don't know how I've not had crypto, or let me rephrase, how I've not found out that, what I mean? Because there's been testing, there's been things that I'm like, it's gotta be, and it ends up not being, it's something else. But it's one where, again, for everyone who's listening, it's not something to be ashamed of if you get hit with any type of disease, because it's not so much if, it's when. It's when is really the way to look at it, because it's going to happen.
I mean, all of this stuff is out there. We're just starting to put names to things that have been in circulation and been present for a long time. And it's going to help the hobby in the long run, but it does. I certainly understand and recognize kind of the overwhelming nature of this, that we keep identifying all of these things that people need to worry about.
All righty. Well, this was utterly wonderful. Thank you. I love learning. Here's the thing, just food for thought. I know that it can be devastating to people, especially when their livelihood is based around captive propagation of these animals. But I don't know if it's just because it's the biologist naturalist in me. I just find the biology of these disease organisms beyond fascinating. There's this whole crazy evolutionary relationship between the host and the pathogen, and there's coevolution and evolutionary arms race, all the buzzwords we like to say. So whenever something pops in our collection at school or here, I'm calm until I'm not calm until I know what it is. And I feel like if I actually get an idea of what it is, that's when I kind of okay, now that I know what it is, I can then plan a mode of attack, if you will. But damn, this is just ugh. Okay. Well, with this being said, we've had you for 2.5 hours, which is really long. So, I don't know if you want people reaching out to you, or maybe you do want people reaching. I mean, you mentioned talking with the hobbyists has led to some insight. So if people want to connect with you about discussing with any of this stuff, is there a mechanism that you recommend? Or
I mean, the benefit of my last name is that there's not a lot of us out there. Yeah. So if you Google my last name, my faculty page will come up in the top of the list, and my email's on there. I do what I do to help the animals, help the hobbyists. I try to stay on top of my email. So shoot me a line. If you don't hear back from me in 48, 72 hours, you can always ping me again. But yeah, I'm happy to try and help. Again, I'm more on the disease side of things. So if you're looking for help for treatment and getting drugs, and I can't help you as much with there, but I can help you figure out what's going on, and then point you in the direction of the people that can then help give you with the medications and things like that. And then I want to do one final plug is we're working on improving it, but for everyone, if you're looking for a veterinarian and you need to find someone with reptile, experience, the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians, or ARAV, ARAV.org, has a Find a Vet feature. We're working on making it easier to use, but that is, everyone who is a member of ARAV can then have their name. It doesn't guarantee that they have a ton of reptile experience, but they're people that want to help work with reptiles, and a lot of them are really, really qualified vets. That is a great first place to start. And if someone contacts me and they say, I don't know where a vet is in my area, that's the resource that I go to first. So it's a good option. Again, we're making that an easier to use feature on the website, so to really help people better find people to help their pets.
Well, thank you so much. I'm certain we've done a lot of episodes now, but I know this is one that people are going to be using as a resource, and that's one of the things that we wanted to do with our podcast. So thank you for helping.
You're very welcome. Unfortunately, I got a whole nother bag of scary stuff, so if next year comes and you need to do another scary episode, just let me know.
This might be an annual
freak everyone out a little bit more.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So
thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a good evening.
Yes.
You too.
So Clint, where can people find you?
You can check out everything that we have available on Metazotics.com. And of course, if you do that, use code CCRadio at checkout. Save yourself 5%. You can message me on Facebook, Clint Bartley, or Metazotics on Facebook, and MetazoticsLLC on Instagram.
Okay. And if you want to find me, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook. You can look up my faculty page. I don't think I've ever said that on here, but you can do that. And it has my email address there. And if you made it this far, share this one with people, because I really like the way the discussion went, and I feel like it'll create a nice solid foundation for people if they're dealing with these disorders and pathogens, because if you don't know much about them, it can be very unsettling. I talked to many people over the past 5 years who were told they had crypto, may or may not have had it, did have it, who knows, but they just didn't know anything about it. And so knowledge is power. So let's use this one as a way to help our community. So be it evening, afternoon, morning, or night, whatever time of day it is, have a great one. And we will see you on the next episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.